All right, welcome to session 42 of our weekly event series where we bring in experts in tech to show you exactly what those roles are like that they work in and the skills required to be successful in these different functions. Today's session is titled, Why Product Management Leaders Look for Operations Experts. And so that's going to be the focus of the conversation today. And we're happy to have Alexandra Woo with us, who is a senior product manager at Etsy. Just to talk through the agenda here really quickly, we're going to start with a quick introduction from us. Promise we'll be done in 2 minutes with our spiel here in the beginning, and then we'll get an introduction from Alex and hear a little bit about her story in her own words, and then we'll jump into the Q&A session that's going to be led by Sergey and myself to start. But please, folks, remember that you can drop your questions into the chat throughout the whole conversation. So you don't have to wait till the end of the session or the last 10 minutes to ask your questions. If something comes to mind, please do drop into the chat. We try to address as many of these questions as possible. And chances are, if you're thinking of a question, somebody else here on the call is also thinking of that question as well. So we encourage you to use that function. You can do it right in the chat, or you can do it using the Q&A function in Zoom webinars. It doesn't matter what you prefer. We'll make sure to catch that. And after we get the introduction from Alex, the focus of the conversation today is going to be about how to leverage experience in various operations functions to land opportunities in PM. But we'll also talk about, generally what kind of skills are required and what other careers typically people come from to get into product management. So we'll get started in about a second here, but we did want to let you know that we're currently taking applications for our 8-week technology career acceleration program that's starting on, it says here summer program. It's actually a typo. It's the fall program. The summer program actually just wrapped up when we graduated 20 students. But if you're looking to develop your skills for a career in tech, especially around non-technical careers where you don't have to learn how to code, we encourage you to apply to the program. The application deadline is August 30th. We'll get to learn directly from experts and professionals in the field in our part-time 8-week program. All right, so again, folks, I'm going to stop sharing the screen here, but I encourage you to use the chat function throughout today's session if you have any questions or anything that comes to mind. But welcome, Alex. Thanks so much for joining us. If you don't mind just starting off, telling us a little bit about your path and how you ended up in tech, maybe in like a 2 to 5 minute condensed version, and we'll dig into your story a little bit more as the conversation progresses.
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm currently a senior product manager at Etsy, but I'm going to start my journey from when I went to college, and I'll explain why. So I graduated from NYU from Gallatin, the School of Individualized Studies, back in 2013. And the reason I always highlight this is the School of Individualized Studies allowed students to shape their own major. And I feel like giving me that freedom early on very much helped me tune into what I wanted to do and learning what my strengths and weaknesses were early on. And I think that's helped me in guiding myself through my career. So once I graduated from NYU, I worked at American Express, and I was there for about a little over 5 years. And the first 3 years or so, I did typical operations work, marketing operations. So what that means was I was the person behind the scenes working with various marketing partners to help get campaigns out the door that related to small business and personal credit card things on the website. I became a subject matter expert on the different tooling processes that we had. And as projects came up of building out new products that we were going to use internally, because of my subject matter expertise, I was given the opportunities to drive a lot of those projects, and eventually became chief of staff of the global marketing operations org. After some time there, I left and I went to WeWork. I was there for about a year. I did business operations and strategy, helped define a group that they were standing up that was called the consulting group, and eventually left WeWork, went to Facebook, also stuck to strategy and operations, worked with small businesses and helped define how to allocate our budget, projecting out our finances, how we want to allocate headcount, and then also working on some small product projects, like working on our CRM, customer relationship management tool for our specific small business sales agents, and then eventually landing my role here at Etsy. So what I do right now is take all of the listings that we have at Etsy and working with my engineering team to define and understand what are our top listings and sending those to our advertising partners such as Google, Facebook, Pinterest, etc. So that's kind of like how I got here. And yeah, it's a little spiel about me.
I love it. You kept that as a very tight story, folks. Actually, the reason why I want to highlight that is, as you're going to networking events, as you're meeting with employers and the like, or for whatever opportunities you might be considering, having a nice tight story about yourself like that is really helpful for folks to be able to digest it. So that I appreciate that, Alex. I want to dig into what you mentioned in terms of becoming a subject matter expert and how that helped elevate you. Talk about that a little bit more. When did you notice that people started noticing that that's really valuable? And why do you think that was so important, making sure that you're being considered for these opportunities internally?
Yeah, definitely. So when I first graduated from school, my first job was American Express, and I was probably in my role for just over a year. And that's when I finally felt comfortable with my job. I felt like I was at a place of not only was I able to execute on my like daily tasks, but I was finally at a point where I knew enough about my job to understand like, oh, what are the gaps? Where can I help shape like, oh, I actually think we can do X to improve Y. And the reason I mentioned that is because I feel like that 12-month mark is a lot of pivot point for a lot of folks. It's when people decide to stay or they decide to find another role. And for me, I just hit to a point where I was like, I feel like I just know what I'm doing. So I ended up staying. And in that, after another 6 months, so my 18 months, I was promoted in role, and then decided to keep staying because I really enjoyed what I was doing. And then I was promoted again. So the reason why I like highlight that is because a lot of people ask me questions of like, well, when do you know it's your time to like leave or pivot or like look for something new? And generally for me is like, if you can still find things to excite you and find things to fix and you're excited in that role, staying isn't being stagnant. I feel like people get that mixed up. And I feel like sometimes staying makes you stand out because in that time you're in role, you better understand all of the different systems and intricacies between like all these cross-functional teams. And you have that like level up of like, oh, I was here when we built this, so I can actually, I know what we're talking about. And when we're doing these enhancements, people end up turning to you and going like, hey, I didn't understand this. Can you actually re-explain this? Or like, hey, you've been working on this tool for a while. What are some features that you think we should enhance to make this a little easier? And once I hit my 18 months, that started happening more frequently. And that's when the project started coming in and I was been given scope bigger than the role that I had.
Really interesting. So did you, once you hit that 12 to 18 month point, did you just start feeling more confident about coming to people in these different areas, maybe where before you weren't sure if you could, and maybe it felt like you were bothering them? Is that what happened?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. It's after that 12 months, it's like you felt more confident that like you could drive decisions and that you can solve issues. And so when people come to you, you're like, oh, I actually can answer this. And you've hit the point of like, if you can't answer it, you don't feel like, I don't want to say stupid, but a lot of people feel like, oh, I'm stupid. I want to shy away. Like, I don't want to say I don't know, but you get confident in saying like, I actually don't know, but I can like figure this out for you and I'll get back to you. And I think building that trust then, and like, as you go back and you build that rapport with your partners, people are like, oh, she's super reliable. She's someone I can go to when I have these. And then those relationships continue to build and grow.
That thing that you said, that figure this out for you, I think that's so helpful for folks to wrap their mind around, because you're in any role, no matter what you do, you're solving problems for somebody. And if you seem like the go-to person that is always putting out fires, I think I read somewhere that the founder of LinkedIn was really seen as that type of person. I think he was at PayPal before that, where he was just the firefighter. He put out fires, and that really elevated him within these different organizations. And obviously, then he ended up starting with one of the most successful companies in the world. But if you can be seen as that type of person, you're going to be invaluable. So as you were going through these different roles, I know you were at American Express for about 5 years. You ended up going to WeWork, and you kind of found a niche for yourself in these more operations-oriented roles. Is that something you like, being a process systems oriented person? Do you feel like that was something you were just inherently good at? How were you able to build out those skills in these different roles?
Yeah, I think so. I accepted out of all the offers that I got outside of college, right? It's like, okay, whatever one paid the best, had the best like name recognition, whatever. I think I just got lucky that I was placed in an operations role, and I'm highly like organized, very like concentrate on like how to build the most optimal process. And that essentially showed me like I was really good at operational roles. Like I was really good at poking holes at problems, figuring out like what are different solutions that we can. And I was the person that they brought in of like, oh, we think we're going to launch this, break it. Like, how would you break this? And then what ended up happening is I started getting like bigger and more white space problems where there wasn't a known solution. No one knew where we had to go next. And it was like, oh, we don't know how to reduce our costs at all. We've tried like these 5 options. It's like, all right, Alex, like try to figure it out. And as I got into my career, that ended up driving my path, not so much my job title, but what teams were like brand new. What were like tools and systems that didn't exist before, and I would be the first person that got to work on it. Or what were processes that didn't exist and that I could help shape that team. And that's actually what helped me like gravitate towards like the different positions I took on after I left American Express.
Now, one question, Alex, is, a lot of times these operational kind of roles, they're quite behind the scenes. You're doing a lot of work, and it's not always visible to people. So how would you go about making sure that your contribution was noticed? Was this intentional? Was it a byproduct of the output that you had? How did you get recognized for actually being good at what you just described, so you were given more responsibility?
Yeah, I think it's 2 things. One is a little bit of luck. And the reason I say that is because I was super lucky to have the leaders that I did that ensured that my work was highlighted, right? So every operational VP that I work with, their counterparts are obviously the business. So they work with the marketing, they work with legal, they work with product, and they ensure that like the work that I did was always highlighted and that I was presenting my work in broader meetings like town halls or executive meetings, pitch ideas, going to other people's teams like team meetings and round tables. And then secondly is you have to be your advocate. Like you work with a bunch of these different partners. And it's kind of what I mentioned before. As you work with your marketing partners, legal partners, product, you partner with them to develop solutions. And if you build those relationships, inevitably they're going to see your outcome and they will appreciate the effort that you've put in. And I feel like those are the levers that helped me get more projects, right? Because there's only so many operational projects. As we're building out new workflow tools, those product directors came and said, who do you have available that can lend an ear and hand? And they asked like, is Alex available to do this? Is Alex able to like dedicate like 10 to 15 hours on this project? And as those kind of came in more, right, I was given those opportunities to like dip my foot in. And I was never given that product title when I was at my time at American Express, but I was part of the squad that led like 3 different product launches. And to like fast forward a little, those relationships helped me get my job at Etsy. So like the product directors and VPs that I worked with and partnered with at American Express, when they had those opportunities, when they went to Etsy, they reached out because they're like, you might have not had this on your title in previous roles, but I know you can do it. And I've seen you do it in previous projects.
That is so important. And a lot of people kind of discount the importance of networking within internally in the companies and making sure that, you get noticed by the leaders inside there, because that is really how you get opportunities later on. And you aligned yourself, even though you didn't have that product title, you worked on those projects, you aligned yourself with those product leaders. So it was really obvious to bring you into that role down the line. I want to back up a little bit here in your story and kind of hear your transition from the operations office manager role to what became a program manager, chief of staff role at American Express. Because I think for a lot of folks, sometimes you start in a role like an office manager and you kind of tend to be pigeonholed in that type of role, right? People see you as some particular type of employee, right? I was talking to somebody today who's breaking into tech right now, and they have been a substitute teacher, right? And so people see, let's say, a substitute teacher in a certain way. How did you take that experience as an office manager and convince American Express that actually your responsibilities had a lot of weight? You could do that job of the senior operations manager, the strategy manager, the chief of staff.
Yeah. So when I was in college, I worked as an office manager for a startup, and I was a jack of all trades, essentially. Like my job was managing the office, but it was also like working on the warehouse, ensuring order fulfillment happened, working with different delivery services and ensuring that like these huge 16-foot trucks are coming into this small Brooklyn space at the right time so we have space to move things. And it was highlighting that like that was just my title, but my entire job was ensuring like the supply chain works, right? And ensuring that if there are on any roadblocks that I would have to be able to solve it because our office only had 7 people. So it was kind of highlighting that in my resume. And honestly, it obviously paid off because one of the first role that I got at American Express was managing different requests that came in. And it was in a year, you would have around 3,600 requests, right? So it's like, how do you make sure you can balance all of that? And being able to juggle a lot of things as an office manager definitely gave me that skill set. And I was able to highlight that when I interviewed. And then making that transition from operations, digital marketing operations into chief of staff is pretty much that same topic of like bidding my time, right? I stayed in role because I really enjoyed my job. And because I was there for like 3 years, I naturally just became a subject matter expert of all of the different toolings that were used for the marketing operations organization. So when there was that opening for a chief of staff, they were like, of course, she already has that knowledge. She helped us build a lot of these toolings. She knows how to optimize the process and has those relationships already built with our marketing partners that it helped me stand out when I was applying for the role.
I think it's really important as well. Another great point, for folks to keep in mind is there's your title and maybe what you do day to day, but then there's all these other things typically that you do when you're part of an organization, no matter what it is. It could be a startup, it could be a nonprofit, it could be in a teaching function that can also speak to your skills that you've developed, the value you've been able to bring to somebody. So don't let whatever your title is be something that limits you from communicating the other value that you've been able to bring. And if you feel like, well, I haven't had a chance to bring other types of value or take on other types of interesting projects or responsibilities within that role, if you feel like you haven't had that opportunity to do that, that's where you have to create those opportunities for yourself, take on side projects, side gigs, volunteer if you need to. And you don't have to spend years doing that. You could do it in a matter of months, but really when you're talking to somebody about a future opportunity, that's what you need to be able to convey. Did you actually do the work? And your title ends up being a lot less important if that's the case. So I want to fast forward now. We're going back, now we're going forward, and talk about the main topic of today's conversation, which is really why operations skills are so critical for product management. Now, you did say that you literally worked on product launches as somebody in an operations role. So that is clear to me why that would be a direct parallel. But can you talk about what else makes somebody that is the type of person that likes or is organized, that likes systems and processes, that does that for themselves, for their family, for other companies and organizations? Why is that so important in a PM?
Yeah. So I think there's 2 skills that I think build a strong product manager. I think one is you have to have a lot of like clear communication, because a large portion of your job is discussing like what are the features that are launching, what are the features that are going to come up, and negotiating with your partners of like what to and not to prioritize. And secondly, you need to be hyper organized, because you are going to be getting feedback regarding your product from all directions. And you're going to have analytics coming to you, research, and you're going to get bombarded with all of these things. And the reason I bring all of this up is someone with an operations background, one of the first things that you have to be able to do is manage. You're like the ultimate project manager, right? And you have to be able to juggle like requests coming at you left and right. And I feel that has prepped me, because in my head, I'm able to organize exactly, okay, this came via email. I create a clear standard of like how I want like features and questions and bugs sent into me. And then I'm able to create like a template, and then that template helps drive like different other like decks and graphs. And I feel like these are all the skill sets that I got when I was in operations. And also the thing as operations is your job is also to figure out how to better optimize existing processes. And that's also your role as a PM. Your job is to look at your current product and figure out what can I do better. Either it's a user experience process, make it easier to understand for your customers, your whole point is to make sure like, how do I build this and make it better and better and better? And that's essentially what you're doing in operations, but it's mainly just through a process. So a lot of those skill sets I feel are super transferable. And I feel like that's why a lot of folks in operations can excel in product management, because you inherently already gained these skill sets. And now you're just kind of like tweaking it to match the role that you have.
Now, when you're bringing on product managers for your own team and evaluating them, if you sense that someone doesn't necessarily have those operational skills, what would make you convinced that they'd still be valuable in the role if they're a little bit weaker on that side?
Yeah, I think other things that I would look for are their clear communication, how they handle conflict, how they manage up and down. What do they look into for, like, how do you determine what the long-term strategy of this like product to be, right? Because someone who's operational might only be able to look at like the immediate next steps that I need to accomplish. But someone who's a little more strategic might not have those innate skills built in, but they're able to see like, oh, I can see this growing to something else in like 3 years. And that's another skill set that if you're really strong at projecting out what the growth should be, you can teach them how to get from there and work backwards. Like, okay, well now how do you break that down and make sure you can actually hit that in 3 years and into tangible like bite-sized pieces so that you can actually develop the product to get there. So I would say like there's definitely different elements that like you can obviously be strong on, and no one is expecting anyone to come into a role being perfect at everything. Like everyone has their weaknesses and strengths, and it's making sure that you're able to highlight the strengths that you do have that can help build into that role.
100% agree on that, Alex. Now, one question that I have for you that I think from the perspective of somebody that's trying to enter the tech industry and they see themselves in a product role, they know it'll take some time to get there to be able to get that type of position. And they're thinking about doing an operations functions for some time to build up to that. Operations can mean so many different things. Strategy is also like a nice word that can mean so many different things, depending on the company that you're in. If I'm sitting there trying to decide how to navigate my next step, I can see project management roles, strategy roles, operations of different types. How do I navigate that? Maybe could you perhaps describe maybe some of the differences in some of these roles and how I might choose the right direction to be on the path to a future product role potentially down the line?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say the big thing that I suggest is understand what skill sets you have that are easily transferable, making sure your resume is tailored to the role that you want, and understand what are your strengths. So like sit down and like write down what are you really good at and what you enjoy, right? So like the reason I caveat that is like, I'm really good at math. I don't enjoy math. So you don't want to go into a role that you don't enjoy. So put those two lists together, and based on what you've written out, what function does that fall better under? Are you better at like processes and creating like optimizations to processes and maybe some tooling? Are you better at like customer service? Are you better at like operational or marketing or like marketing operations? Are you better at like that long-term visioning and allocating, like if you are good with numbers, like doing the financial analysis? Are you good at analysis? Are you good at research? Figure out what those skill sets are. And then I would say like, obviously go for those roles, network with folks who have those roles, especially at the companies that you're interested in. And then as soon as you're in the company and you're doing the role, you inadvertently are going to probably have over crosses with all these other team functions. And if you realize, okay, yeah, I've worked with product, I understand like this is definitely the next step that I want to do. Become good friends with the PM that you're working with. Understand what they do day to day. What are things that they like and don't like? And the reason I also want to highlight that is because I feel like a lot of the times product management is like this sexy title that people don't always know like what that means. And like it's different everywhere. So you really want to understand like, do I love that? Do you love working with all the different cross-functional teams, doing a lot of that strategy work? And as you talk to those partners, you'll get a better sense of like, oh, do I fit for this role? Or do I actually enjoy what I'm doing now? Or you want to pivot to a different role? And I think that's like another thing to call out is there's so many job opportunities, especially within the tech field right? There's product marketing, there's product management, project management, technical program management. There's so many different titles and everyone does something slightly different. So there's like a little cut for everybody. And you won't really know if you have the skill set or you like it until you meet folks and get to talk to them. So invest that time to go and like meet folks.
That's great. And actually, I really like even the examples that you gave of when you said, think about what you're strong at. Your examples were from the perspective of sort of the outcomes, right? Like if you're good at the math, how did that apply in the organization? Can you do the financial analysis? If you're good at the processes, what can you point to that you've done in order to implement processes in the organization that you're at? The worst thing in the world is if people say they're good at stuff and they just don't back it up, or people that say they're good at communications and you try to read their resume and you can't even decipher it because it's so poorly written. It's kind of an unfortunate thing. So self-awareness, I think, is important, but tying those skills when you're thinking about that, when you're making that list, tying it to something specific that you've done that you can talk about and demonstrate on your resume to show that you're good at process or math or whatever it is so important. I'm really glad that you mentioned that.
So I'm gonna take a pause really quickly to remind folks to drop their questions into the chat or use the Q&A feature here in Zoom webinars. Up to you how you want to do it, but we're at the 32-minute mark, so we encourage you to start thinking about those questions right now. But of course, Sergey and I can ask questions all day, and I am ready with the next one. So one thing that you mentioned, Alex, is that in a product management role, probably even in some of the operations roles that you had, where you're making these decisions consistently, you're negotiating with internal stakeholders, you're getting data from external stakeholders and the like. What do you think made you effective in negotiating and getting buy-in from people within these roles? Because it's not easy, and that is one of the things that people who are excited about product management don't always realize is in a PM role, you are being pulled in different directions oftentimes. And yes, you might be a product owner and you have some ownership, but there's definitely going to be some boss or many bosses that are telling you what to do. So what made you effective as a negotiator internally?
Yeah, great question. And I would say trust. And I'm going to caveat this with that trust doesn't come immediately. So anytime you join a new company, when I joined a new company, one of the first things that I do, like my goal for the first 30, 60 days is meet every single stakeholder that I'm going to work with. And one of the key things that I ask all of my stakeholders are like, how do you communicate? How do you like getting updates? How do you like talking through like prioritization? Is it email? Is it Slack? Is it on the phone? Understanding like how involved they want to be. What was the process that they did previously? What did they like? What did they not like? And by gathering all this information from my stakeholders, I get a better understanding of like what happened previously to whoever might have had my role and where improvements that could be made. And I also learned like how they want to listen and get information. So that's like the first line of like starting to build that trust. And then inevitably, as you try to get their feedback and you start prioritizing and developing out your roadmap, I'm very keen in ensuring that I bring everyone along with me through the journey. And that sounds like, it's a lot of stakeholders. It is, but like you can always group your stakeholders. Like I might have like 15 different marketing partners, but I'll sit like all of marketing in a room and say like, hey, based on the feedback that I've been giving, this is generally what I'm thinking. And I never say like, this is what I'm doing. I try to ensure that they feel like they have the room to push back and like reprioritize, because the decisions I've made are only from information that they've had. And by having all of marketing in a room together, it also gives ownership to everybody else of like, you're also listening to what the opportunities are for like the other stakeholders. So you can make that like judgment call with the group. And as you bring them along the journey and then you actually deliver on the things that you've promised, this process probably takes like 6 to 8 months, right? It's long. It's not a short win, but after that 6 to 8 months, feel like that trust is built and you've already built this rapport with your team that now they're like, oh, I know Alex is going to deliver on this. And if she can't, like previously, she will communicate that. And I feel like that has helped me be able to negotiate and talk through and pivot if we have to. Also, when I do have to pivot and reprioritize, it's never like, I'm not doing this, we can't do this. It's always bringing all the information with you, right? Explaining out why aren't we able to do this? When can we do it? And like, what were the roadblocks that brought us here and what can we improve upon in the future? And I feel like as you ensure like you have these open conversations and dialogues, that's what builds that trust, and that even though things won't always happen in the timing that partners want, they know eventually it's going to get done and there's going to be good reason if it can't.
That's really great. And I think for a lot of folks, myself included, in previous roles, when you first enter an organization, it can be intimidating. Maybe you're entering a new industry and you have no idea what all the acronyms mean. Maybe you are not used to working with all these various stakeholders, but having the confidence to go in, raise your hand, meet with all the different people, learn from them, and like you said, build that rapport, which doesn't happen overnight, definitely takes some time. But doing that and being the person that isn't waiting for somebody to tell them to do that is pretty critical in being successful in that role. And by the way, you're going to be seen as a leader within that function as well. I see ma'am has a question here. That's, well, it's not necessarily a question. It looks like it's more of a comment that a good amount of the roles that you're talking about include value you can provide for your team and great communication. That I think you would agree with me there. Actually, to touch on that, so I'm glad you brought that up, ma'am. Communication skills are hard to teach, hard to learn, and soft skills in general. I think while everyone says you have to have them, I don't think anybody really has cracked that nut in terms of like how do you make somebody much better if they're struggling with that. So do you have any examples of folks that you've worked with where maybe they could have been better communicators, whether that's written or in meetings or whatever it is, and they were struggling a little bit, but somehow they were able to improve over time? And what do you think contributed to that?
Yeah. So when I actually worked at American Express, I had an analyst who did a great job, but when she sent emails or had like communications, newsletters, a lot of things got like missed in context. And a lot of the things that we ended up doing were workshopping. So before she sent any emails, not so I can like help her like reform. But I also told her, like, if you feel uncomfortable with me doing it, get a peer that writes really good emails, and ask them also for feedback. Like, you shouldn't shy away from asking your peers to review your information. Also, after meetings, she asked me to critique like how she came off verbally in the meeting setting. So constantly asking for feedback. And after a year, there was such huge growth in both her writing and communication style. And it was to the point where like almost every partner gave feedback of like, wow, she like really improved. So I think like the big key here is everyone has room for improvement, and you just need to take the time to make sure, one, to acknowledge what that is, and then ensuring that like you practice, like draft emails, even though you might not send them, write a launch announcement for like even the smallest feature that you're doing so you can practice and get feedback on it. And then eventually with time, it'll get a lot better.
And kudos to her for being coachable and looking for that feedback and being self-aware, because I think, we may think that we have certain strengths, and oftentimes hearing blunt feedback like that can be a little bit painful, but being okay with that is critical for growth. And so that's really great. I'm really happy to hear that story. So the next question I have for you is going to touch on, being in a role like product management without being technical, without being a coder. I think a lot of times when somebody enters a PM role, specifically because you're working with designers, you're working with engineers, and some engineers are very, very, very technical, and sometimes you have to decipher things that, quite frankly, even other engineers have a hard time understanding. So, I'm curious how you maybe overcame the fact that it is a bit intimidating to work with folks that are very, very technical if you are not technical yourself. And, did you just read up on things? Did you kind of, do more of what you talked about earlier, which is talk to more people within the organization? How did you gain the trust of those folks when you yourself maybe are not super technical? And I'm making an assumption here. I don't know how technical you are, so maybe you can expand on that, but how'd you do that?
I am not technical at all. I don't know how to code anything. So yeah, I would say like honestly, my first like 3 months in role, I definitely had imposter syndrome of like, wow, I would walk into meetings with my engineers and I would have like, was like, whoo, I was like, I have no idea what just happened. And honestly, it was reminding myself like, that's okay. Anywhere that you're new, you're generally not going to immediately understand everything, but also understanding like the onus is on you. Like you can't rely on everybody else to teach you. You have to take the initiative and figure out and like go learn. So my next like 2-3 months were literally sitting with engineering and asking them to go through like every single system, going through all the different diagrams, asking them also to include me anytime we had a new hire and they were going, even if the content was super technical, letting me sit in on these meetings. So one, I'm like more of a person that like digests more and more as I hear it. And I would just jot down a bunch of questions and I would ask. I mean, like sometimes it was like something as simple as like, what does KS stand for? And like, you have to get over that fear of like, oh, am I asking something like super obvious? Because the person on the other end generally is going to be pretty thankful that you're asking because later on there's a payoff, right? Like once you actually understand all the jargon, all the systems, how the tools work, understand like the different like technical tools that we're using are like, we use like Kafka Stream. I've never heard of Kafka Stream before I had my job at Etsy. And it's like, once I can actually understand what everything does, right? I know enough at a high level to answer the more immediate questions from my partners, and I can alleviate that from the engineers. And then I can also start like asking like, okay, well, what are ways that we can like save money, decrease our spending in like different cloud services? And it's like, as I start asking those questions, they also realize, okay, she doesn't know how to code, but she obviously understands what our infrastructure is like. And then they trust me to like start driving and pushing direction to our projects. And so again, it's another thing, it takes time, takes a lot of effort, but the payoff is worth it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes these acronyms, like I remember when I joined the last role, I was talking to engineers, we had 3 different names for our internal proprietary systems for the same system, and it was driving me crazy. I couldn't figure it out for a while. And sometimes it can be intimidating, but in the end of the day, these are all these products and platforms are there to solve a particular problem. And if you can back into what problem they're solving, then you can usually figure out why they exist and why they're being used, even though they may sound technical to you. But when you were doing this and you were asking all these questions, how did you make sure that you retain this information and, you know, maybe became a little bit more tech savvy, if you will, in the process? Were you taking a lot of notes? Were you creating documentation in your internal wiki? What was your process there?
Yeah, so I'm a big note taker, and I would say you don't have to follow what I do, right? Everyone has their optimal learning. For me, it's writing. So anytime I am learning anything, I like literally write every single word down, and that's how I retain the information. Some people are more artistic and they have to draw. Some people have to like speak it out. So you need to learn what your learning method is and then do that. But for me, it was note taking. I took a lot of notes. I created a lot of diagrams. I use those diagrams to like verify, like, is this flow correct? And then obviously have my engineers like poke holes at it, and then I would kind of like iterate on it. And that was how I learned. And also then I reverse taught. So I was like, okay, can I actually do this presentation to you of like how our architecture flows? And that was also a way for me to verify like, okay, I really understand it or not.
I'm going to ask Mam's question here in a second, but before I do, I wanted to ask, follow up on Vadim's previous question. With you being non-technical, did that come up at all during the interview process at Etsy, like whether you're technical or not, and if you have those skills?
No, it didn't come up, but I've heard enough times. I think a lot of folks shy away from applying to roles because I think postings will sometimes say like, need to have like computer science background, blah, like, I don't know, coding, Python, whatever. My advice to folks is ignore it and still apply. Because if it really matters, it will come up again and they'll screen you out later. But for me personally, it didn't come up. And honestly, a lot of folks like that I know who are currently in product, none of us have any technical background. If anything, some people might have picked it up as they were in role, just based on like some of the products that they owned.
I remember when I was interviewing for a particular role, and the CEO, it was an advertising product, and I hadn't worked in advertising before, and the CEO asked me, all right, Vadim, what's the difference between a JS VPAID and a Flash VPAID? And I was like, I don't even know what repaid was. Now I do. But I was pretty intimidated in the moment. And I told him like, look, sir, I don't have that answer for you, but I can guarantee that I can learn it really quickly. And within 6 months, I was working on a new JavaScript ad unit for the company that was actually using that technology pretty heavily. So a lot of this stuff you can pick up on the job. Quite frankly, if I knew that going into any other conversation, it wouldn't have mattered at all. It was just relevant for that particular company.
So the question here in the chat, and by the way, folks, we do have about 10 minutes here left, a little bit more than 10 minutes. So please do add your questions in the chat. But Matt was wondering whether there are particular skills, and you did touch on this, Alex, but are there skills that you can speak to that you picked up from other jobs that now you look in hindsight are super useful in your current role?
Yeah, I would say, so I did have retail jobs. I was an office manager. A lot of it is organizational based, but the other one that I want to like highlight, especially if there's are like new grads in the call, are like college. A lot of the work that I did in college in general helped me understand and like guide me. Like you work on team projects, someone is going to slack. You need to figure out how are you going to manage that situation? Are you going to ignore it? Are you going to face it? Are you going to do everything? Are you going to allocate the work? Are you the leader? Are you the follower? Those are like all things that I think are skills that I learned in school that obviously helped and I carried on to like when I went to work. Other things are like I used to work at J. Crew folding a lot of clothes, and this sounds so like minuscule, but all the shirts had to be folded the exact same way in a proper line, and like nothing could come out. And that teaches you like attention to detail. Like it sounds really extreme correlation, but those kind of things help. Like when I work on decks now, so PowerPoints, right? I can easily point out when things are off center, when things aren't aligned. I don't know if folding clothes helped me identify that, but it might have. Like that was definitely something I had to like look for. So I do think like as you sit through and think of like, do I have the skill sets? You probably have way more skill sets than you're giving yourself credit for. And I think that's like the honest conversation and open conversation like individuals have to have with themselves. And you need to do a little bit of marketing of your own skills of how they correlate to the job that you want. Because you probably have 90% of it. You just need to learn how to market that and what you did that fit that profile.
Yeah, that's so spot on. You know, a lot of folks there's just a lack of confidence because it can seem intimidating. You read these job descriptions and it's like, wow, I have to know everything. Like, how do you expect me to have this experience already? But it really is about, you know, having a focus and actually being able to market yourself and describe some of those experiences that you've had that, you know, may not be obvious, may not be obviously transferable, but they truly are. And having confidence when you deliver that. You know, sometimes it takes a little bit of internal mindset shifting, learning how to talk about yourself before that confidence can be felt by others. But that's such an important first step. I'm glad you said that. I'd love to hear a little bit more in your current role here about if you can, and then we have another question coming in here, so we'll ask in a second. But in your current role, if you can tell us a little bit more about the day-to-day of what it means to be a product manager at Etsy. Tell us kind of what you're up to, what you.
Yeah, so day-to-day, a lot of the work is, so we do everything in a 2-week sprint. So that means in every 2 weeks, we gather a bunch of features that we're going to work on. So part of it is ensuring that we're going to hit our goals and feature launches that are coming up. But the other, I would say like that's maybe like 30% of my job. The other 70% is future forward thinking. So like I develop a roadmap for the whole year and ensuring like, for example, I know in Q4 of this year, we're going to work on some like machine learning. So working with like the other product owners and other cross-functional teams to understand like what are the requirements that we need, what are like the other partnerships and prioritizations that we need to build in, and making sure that by the time we get to the place that we're going to pick up this work, my team doesn't have the roadblocks and that everything is ready to go. So a lot of it is like the two parallel paths of like ensuring what needs to get done are getting done. And then the other end is making sure like things that are going to happen in the future are all ready, set up, tickets are written, and then that they're able to go as soon as that time comes.
There's a question here from Darren. He said, outside of your learning method, what was the best way you were able to get the technical terms to click and translate into your role? Or is there anything else that you did to get a better foundational understanding of some of this stuff?
Yeah, I think on the job learning. I think like when I first started and like I got training on all of it, it's easy for it to go over your head because like you don't understand what this all means. But as you actually see like, oh, this tool sends a listing from Etsy to our hydration. Well, this will now make no sense, but then like, and then we're able to send it to our ad partner. And then like when I change a price, I can see it reflect in 23 hours. And like, as you see these things in real life happening, then I'm like, oh, like the gears start clicking. And then as you hear how the process works over and over and over again, that's helped me understand. Also, like when you have to like answer questions, find answers for like your partners, that also helped me learn. Like when people ask me questions and I have to go figure out what the answer is, right? Like just doing that act alone will help me learn and understand what I need to do and what the technicalities of the job are.
Yeah, and I think if you're in product, you probably also spend a lot of time in Stack Overflow when something happens. And actually, a lot of other engineers, you're even if you're a technical person, you're not going to know everything in the world, and there's constantly new technologies and frameworks and everything that you need to learn. And so, in that case, you'd be going to other engineers, for example, for help. It looks like Dee has a question. Are you still working with a team you started with at Etsy? I know you've been there for a little over a year, so maybe you started in a different team. And what are some things you wished you had known when you first started at the company?
Ooh, so I am with the same team. Some things that I wish I had known. That is a really good question. You might have me stumped. I'm not sure.
Or maybe, actually, I'll rephrase it. Maybe that'll help. Etsy is a different type of company altogether than I mean, you were at Facebook before that, obviously a consumer company, but we work. I don't even know. I mean, in terms of a technical product, I'm not sure exactly what they were. I don't think they knew themselves. But when you're going into Etsy, it's a different sector altogether. Do you feel like maybe you were at a disadvantage not having worked in that industry at all, or and you wish you knew something before going into that, or it didn't matter as much?
So I never worked too heavily in advertising, even though I came from Facebook. So that is something that I came in going like, oh, is this going to be a disadvantage that I don't fully understand all the different ad things? I still don't understand too much of the ad world. So at first it definitely felt like it would be a disadvantage, but it ended up being just like an opportunity. So like I just did a lot of research as we looked into like building out like a native ad unit. What does that mean? Who are our competitors? And like just taking my own time to understand like what that is. I don't think that I would have wished that I would have known about it. I think there's always going to be opportunities that you have to like invest time to learn. And that's just like something you go into every role knowing.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I've worked in a bunch of different industries and software companies that service different types of customers, and you can't know everything. But increasingly, what I believe is going to continue to happen in the workforce is, those transferable skills, we talked about it before, but we'll say it again. They are much more important than any of these much more specialized skills, because you can pick that stuff up on the job. But there's new industries that are growing now. There's new job titles that are being created that we're not even aware of at a faster pace, because innovation is growing at a faster pace. And I think that is the future of what someone that's an effective contributor to a team will bring to the table, is the transferable skills. They're much more important than any really, really specific sector level knowledge. Now, that can help you, to your point, going all the way back to what you said, where if you're a domain expert and you want to get your foot in the door, remove the friction. Hey, if you know everything there is to know about selling into the government sector, as an example, and you want to work in marketing, target companies that sell to the government sector and tell them why you might be good in a marketing role, because at least then you're transitioning jobs, but you're coming in with that domain expertise. Last question here for me as we wrap up. Alex, I know you've been at Etsy for a little over a year. For someone like you that's a senior product manager, what would you say is the next step? What do you envision yourself doing in, I don't know, 2 or 3 years? What are some potential next steps?
I should have prepared for this question. I should have known this would have been a
question. I didn't tell you ahead of time on purpose.
So the one thing that I really learned through my career is like mental health comes first, and that is like a really important thing. So a lot of the things that I look for, I can't say where I want to go, where I see the growth, but I do know that I want to work somewhere where I feel encouraged to have a voice, have the autonomy to like build and like bring in change to the product. I do love working places where it's very collaborative. And so the big thing that I know is like where I'll be in 2 years is hopefully working on something that I feel super challenged in. I feel like I'm growing, and I feel like I have the space to also like step back and like take that breather room. I think a lot of the times people are stuck in this pattern of like constantly go, go, go. And like the work culture in America is like, you know, you got to be able to churn out and like show like impact fast. And though impact is important, like it's also important to take a step back and ensure like where do you fall in this also. So making sure that there is that healthy balance between the two. So I don't know where I'll be exactly, but hopefully I'll be challenged and like still feel like very comfortable. Like comfortable is not the right word, but feel like at a nice, healthy mental state.
I love that answer. I think that's really important to have that balance. It's increasingly more and more important to people as kind of burnout is becoming something that's not necessarily praised anymore. Thank God. But I'm glad that you mentioned that. And also for folks here that are themselves not sure what's going to happen later, that's okay. We change our minds about this type of stuff all the time as we become more informed, as maybe different opportunities open up to us, as life circumstances change. And so you don't necessarily have to have your next 5 or 10 years completely planned out. And it can change all the time. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. Really valuable information that you provided for us. Hopefully for folks here in the room, this created a lot of, I guess, ideas about how accessible these roles can be, right? Clearly, you have to be really talented to be successful in these roles, but there are stepping stones that you can take to get there. And I think you're a great example of somebody that obviously has been able to work for some great organizations, but also really learn a lot to continue to bring value to them, and also continue to challenge yourself and work in exciting organizations as well. So thanks so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Yeah, of course.
And folks, just to wrap up here in the last few minutes, I'm going to share my screen one more time and want to thank everybody for joining us today as well. We try to bring in amazing experts like Alex almost every week here at School16. We'd love to hear your feedback about how this particular event went. And if you want to hear a particular type of speaker here at School16, because we have a lot of repeat folks that join us, please feel free to let us know in this survey, school16.co/survey. We're going to drop into the chat as well. If you could just give us your feedback, we'd love reading through those. And then please follow us on social media, School16Co on Instagram. And if you type in School16 on LinkedIn, we show up as a school. So please follow us there to find out about more events. And right now we have an event planned for September 2nd. It's going to be an afternoon event with Christina, who is a head of customer success at LinkedIn, which is going to be another great conversation about how she was able to navigate her career there. So again, thanks so much for everybody that was able to join us today. Thanks so much, Alex, for joining us too. And we hope to see everybody soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.